I'm Gary Null, and that's our issue of the day. Now let's go over and say hello to our guest standing by. I gave you his background earlier, Gerald Celente. The publication and the website is TrendsResearch.com. His journal is the TrendsJournal. Nice to have you with us today, Gerald.
Oh, thanks for having me, Gary.
Gerald, I would like for you to take a look at 3 areas and give us your predictions based upon studying trends, what you see likely to happen. First, what you see happening if either the people running for president win, what is the likely outcome? Secondly, 270 million Americans are living in extreme stress, financial deprivation, and over 100 million Americans are now considered poor. 18 million children are hungry. 48 million are on food stamps, and almost another 50 million are about to face homelessness because they're underwater in their mortgages, and the value of that property is not coming back. So what do you say for the working class today when they've been made all these promises but nothing specific about their future? And finally, tell us what you see happening in cities like Washington, D.C. and Maryland, where we're broadcasting now, and Detroit. Let me just quote this before you start. This is from Economic Collapse. Turn out the lights. The largest U.S. cities are becoming cesspools of filth, decay, and wretchedness. I'll quote this. Once upon a time, the largest U.S. cities were the envy of the entire world. Sadly, that is no longer the case. Sure, there are areas in New York City, Boston, Washington, Los Angeles that are still absolutely beautiful. But for the most part, our major cities are rapidly rotting and decaying. Cities such as Detroit, Cleveland, Baltimore, Memphis, New Orleans, St. Louis, and Oakland, were all once places where middle-class workers thrived and raised their families. Today, all of those cities are rapidly becoming transformed into cesspools of filth, decay, and wretchedness. Millions of good jobs have left our major cities in recent decades, and poverty has absolutely exploded. Basically, you can turn out the lights because the party's over. In fact, some major U.S. cities are literally turning out the lights. In Detroit, 40% of the street lights are broken, and the city cannot afford to repair them. So Mayor Bing has come up with a plan to cut the number of operating street lights in half and leave vast sections of the city totally in the dark at night. I wonder what will happen when the crime rate goes up. But don't look down on Detroit too much, because what is happening in Detroit will be happening where you live soon. Those are the issues. The forum is yours. Please address them.
Well, on the first issue, the likely outcome of the election, we had forecast a year ago, actually, over a year, October 7th, just about a year ago, 2011, that Obama would win, given who the front runners were at the time in the Republican Party. And they were Bachmann, Perry, and Romney. And we hold by that forecast. This is going to be, we believe, one of the lightest turnouts of voting in modern history, probably, in modern history. There's not a lot of enthusiasm for any of the candidates, or either the two candidates, and it reminds me, of course, of when I say either of the candidates, Mark Twain's wonderful quote that if voting meant anything, they wouldn't let us do it. And that's really what it comes down to. People are actually going to go out and vote for a lesser of two evils, when in real life they would never have a partner, do business with, or have relationships with a lesser of two evils. Evil is evil. And when you look at what differences it is going to make who gets in, it really comes down to who's going to destroy things slower. And it's a neck-and-neck race. Their policies are essentially the same, only the rhetoric is different. And that's not rhetoric. When you look at Obama, all of those liberals out there, I guess you missed the story yesterday where he's going to, he's pushing for repassage of the draconian surveillance acts that rob us of our Fourth Amendment rights of search and seizure. He's also, of course, now he's ratcheting up the talk and sending, well, look at Libya. I mean, my God, how could anybody not see that this was going to happen? And the unrest throughout the Middle East, of which he keeps fomenting, and Romney is just going to step it up one more notch. And then again, you look at the records, not one head rolled on Wall Street from the greatest bank robbery in world history, where the banks were doing the robbing. So as it comes to the presidential reality show, both contestants are basically the same. One sings and dances a little much better than the other one, and it's only a show, and Obama is the teleprompter champ. On the other issues, as you mentioned, the 200 and something million Americans, a new study's coming out showing how many people now, it's over 10% more, put themselves in lower class and lower middle class than before. Dr. Paul Craig Roberts, one of the contributors to the TrendsJournal and a former Assistant Treasury Secretary under Ronald Reagan, just penned a piece in which he shows that median household income has really fallen to not lowest levels as they're showing now, to 1989 levels, but more in terms of 1960s levels, in terms of how much wealth has been drained out of the average family. And it's just getting worse. There is no turning this around using the policies that that both political parties have in place. When you talk about what's going on in Maryland and D.C. and Detroit and St. Louis and Cincinnati, it's virtually every major city in this country, and minor ones as well, are decrepit and decaying. You see the filth in the streets. You know, I've been around a long time. It was never like this. You see the crumbling infrastructure. That's not rhetoric. I mean, getting on Amtrak is like speeding into the 20th century. Well, you know, when you travel the world, you see how far behind we are. And what is the talk? Well, again, tune into today's talk. It's war talk. That's all they talk. And it's what President Dwight D. Eisenhower warned the American people of, that the military-industrial complex was going to take over the nation and rob us of the genius of our scientists, the sweat of our laborers, and the future of our children. So it's all come to pass. And when you see how desperate it is, Gary, look what America's public enemy number one did today. Osama bin Bernanke. That's right, the head of the Federal Reserve, who has been printing all of this digital money and in doing so devaluing our dollar. They announced more QE3. See the price of gold? No surprise. I had said, and I've said on your show over and over again, during this election year, they're going to pump up the economy with more cheap money, and gold prices will go up. Gold is up as I speak now, $35 on the day. So we can see what the future is going to bring, because Osama bin Bernanke also is signaling that they're going to keep interest rates at the zero rate until, about 2015. What does that mean? It means it kills savings initiatives for everybody out there that in the old days used to squirrel away, sock away money for a rainy day, and you'd get a reasonably good interest rate on it for putting it in the bank. No more. You'll get 0.5% or so as the banks loan it out at usury rates. So where are things going? The working class, there isn't any. We become the plantation class. Look at the jobs that are being created. We only lost about 750,000 full-time jobs since March. Look at the new numbers that came out today on how many more people put in for unemployment. Yeah, they went up unexpectedly. Unexpectedly by whom? What is the average person going to do? The average person, as I see it, in order to survive these times, don't buy one thing that you don't need to buy. Stop eating all this crappy food and buy, and the big lie is about how much organic costs. Yeah, it costs more, but guess what? You eat a lot less because of the higher value of nutrition in it. And so you start eating smart. Stop wasting money. Don't send your kid to college to learn how to become a photographer or art history if you can't afford it and you're not from the 1%. Only send your child to school for advanced education if it's going to bring in an advanced income with jobs and skills that are going to be needed in the future. Number 3, don't buy anything that you don't need, particularly from foreign countries. The season is ending now, of course, with the farmers markets, but buy as much local as you can. And do everything you can to join in with your neighbors to build your community. That's why I'm up here in Kingston, New York. It's a small community. You know what the people here want? They're all happy, the store owners, the entrepreneurs, when everyone is doing well. There's not a jealousy. There's a camaraderie. Those are the things I see that could only push this forward.
I appreciate those insights. Now let's go to a few others. First, I would like the American people to know that they have not been given the truth about these quantitative easings. And also, this is not the third, because uncounted is the secret $16 trillion the Federal Reserve gave to just 20 institutions, mainly banks, like Goldman Sachs got $800 billion, and Citigroup and Bank America together got $4.5 trillion, and others down the road got money at zero interest. Now, why doesn't anyone talk about why that is not a debt? Since there's no interest, and we've given it to companies, and they haven't paid it back, but we don't count that $16 trillion. And we only knew that there was $16 trillion in 22,000 transactions because Ron Paul and Bernie Sanders, the independent from Vermont, got the legislation passed so that the Fed would be audited. So this is actually from the audit. That's one $16 trillion that we didn't know about. Then we don't count the $1 trillion in student loans that should be completely eliminated. Then we don't count the $1 trillion in credit card debt. But we do count, as part of our gross domestic product and why we're growing, what people buy on credit cards. And I'm saying that's not the way it should be. People should be able to use disposable income, their savings. That then could legitimately be part of a growing economy. If you're buying something on credit card, you're incurring the debt and the interest on that debt when you buy that. So that's a debt. That's not an asset. Then we don't include the $23 trillion in corporate debt, nor do we include the over $3 trillion in state debt, nor local debt, nor do we include the underfunded and unfunded entitlements that are going to be coming due. After all, look at the 35 million Americans who are seniors using Medicare. Then look in the next 10 years and you're up to almost 75 million. Who's supposed to pay for that? So that now, if you add this up, just on these debts that I just mentioned, and plus our $16 trillion in federal debt, now you're up to $122 trillion in debt. Now our gross domestic product is $14.4 trillion. So you're looking at approximately 600 to 700% debt against gross domestic product. And I'm not even including the $6 trillion that we have borrowed from other countries, including China, $1.8 trillion, $800 billion from Japan, that we have no intention of paying back. Then you're up to 8 times debt, 800% debt to gross domestic product. Now, since our manufacturing base is not coming back, we've lost 58,000 factories, and since all of our treaties are based upon corporate America and globalization, making sure that anything we make is made cheaply in another country, and hence no one could compete against that product brought back in the United States, then where are the jobs going to come from? I don't see any resurgence in manufacturing. I only see the small business people being the backbone for the future. But why can't we be honest about the debt and the fact that these stimuluses have not helped the American public? It helped a different economy, the economy that's too big to fail, which did not trickle down to help open up loans, low interest and zero interest loans for small businesses, to readjust the mortgage rate of a person's house to the actual value of their mortgage, so therefore a person's house wouldn't be worth $100,000 and the mortgage $200,000. The mortgage comes down to the value of their house, and then allow people a chance to pay rent to live there instead of paying an interest rate on a mortgage. Why can't we deal with any of this, and why isn't any of this that I just discussed being talked about by the economists or the broadcasters or the politicians?
Well, the reason it's not talked about by the broadcasters is because, I mean, who controls the corporate media? You know, I mean, they don't want that. That's not a story they want to get out because they're all part of it. Hey, remember when that wonderful other Democratic president, Bill Clinton, deregulated the communications industry and made it possible for all the consolidation? You know, they forgot about that one. And he, I mean, the fact is, Gary, everything that you said just really boils down into one word. I could answer why not in one word. Fascism. The merger of state and corporate powers. The bigs have taken over everything. They've taken over, what is it? I just mentioned communications. Take a look at agriculture. You keep going down the list. Even military, consolidated. How about retail? Oh, yeah, wonderful Walmart. How many people have they put out of business, entrepreneurs? I think the estimates are around, 80, 100,000, probably much higher. You know, when I was a kid, there were two Macy's, one in Harold Square and one in Yonkers. You know, now they're everywhere. They're in there were Home Depots and Lowe's. There used to be a thing, little boys and girls and children of all ages, called hardware stores that every local community had. Oh, and I love hearing Mittens Romney out there bragging as a vulture capitalist and a hedge fund specialist, how he created jobs for the consolidation of killing all of those stationery stores. Again, some of you out there may be able to remember those if you're old enough, before we had Staples. Oh, he created wonderful jobs. You could have a job at Staples. So what's happened is, Gary, these aren't corporations anymore. These are hedge fund operations. The entire country is controlled by the fascist corporate, quote, corporate/government matrix. That's all it is.
Okay,
that's why you're not hearing about any of this. You name the sector, it's controlled, it's an oligopoly.
All right. Two other areas I'm interested in. We do not pay attention to any of the human rights movements in the European Union. We never hear a word about how well Iceland is doing when it refused to pay the European Union and the English and the Dutch banks back debt. They simply said no, so they could stabilize their economy. Otherwise, they'd have put all their population into debt peonage for the rest of their lives. So now their economy is growing again. But now we have Greece, and the austerity program that the corrupt politicians in Greece put in place means that they don't suffer. They're wealthy. But all the other people of Greece do. That is also true for Spain, and there are millions of people suffering in Spain. The unemployment rate in Spain is almost 40%, highest of any of the European Union nations per population. So they're beginning to say no more, and they're going to start throwing out their governments completely. I see this happening in Ireland, Spain, Portugal, and Greece. I don't see it happening in Italy at this point, though it could. And then that's going to have reverberations here. So that's my first question. What do you see happening in the European zone? And then what do you see happening in the United States concerning the 100 million abject poor and gangs and kidnappings and violence and the ghettoization of suburban areas that we would never have thought possible just a couple of years ago?
On the Eurozone, yesterday was a big day in Europe. It was the day that the German Supreme Court ruled whether it was within the German Constitution or not for the Europeans to stay into the European Stability Mechanism, as they call it, the ESM, and giving Germans the liability on their behalf of some 190 billion euros. And of course, the German Supreme Court, as with any Supreme Court, they bend to the power interests. So it wasn't an issue of it whether or not it being against the Constitution. It was how would it affect the Eurozone. So what they did was they made it, quote, legal for the this scam to continue. Because the reality is, and it goes back to what's going on throughout Europe, is that this money isn't going into bailing out the countries. It's bailing out the banks and those so-called investors. So the funds, all of these funds, and you talk about austerity, while they starve the people, this money goes directly to the accounts of the financial investors who are now being repaid their loans in full plus interest. And at the same time, they're pushing the people of their countries deeper into poverty. It's a complete takeover. The banks have taken over the world. This also, what this ruling did, it took power out of the Bundestag and moved it up into Brussels. You're going to see a complete centralization of Europe under the banking interest stationed in Brussels. Sovereignty is going to be lost. So that's one thing. And when you're looking and talking about what's going on in the Eurozone and the class warfare that's breaking out, you cannot. You also have to look at what's going on around the rest of the world. What's going on in Tunisia, and what's going on in Egypt, and Yemen, and in Bahrain, and in Libya, and of course the civil war that the United States and its allies have started in Syria. A lot of this has to do with the money being concentrated at the top. And my saying, when people lose everything and have nothing left to lose, they lose it. What we're looking at, Gary, is the beginning of the first great war of the 21st century. They're using this incident, this flashpoint of an anti-Islamic movie that some moron produced as the reasoning for all of these disruptions that are going on in Egypt and Tunisia and Libya and the killing of the ambassador to Libya. That's like saying World War I began because the Archduke Ferdinand was assassinated. It's all of the American imperialism. It's all of what the United States and NATO and the European countries have been doing to destabilize the Middle East. So what we're seeing is when you put all the pieces together, and now, of course, what's going on in the United States with this growing underclass, and you look at the numbers that just came out. The United States ranks near the bottom of young people being born into poor families that could move into a higher level. These are OECD facts. So what does it mean? It means more drug wars, more gang wars, and more of America major cities turning into Mexico cities, where you're going to see kidnapping and you're going to see more violence, and the response is going to be by the lunatic psychopathic politicians and sociopaths, we got to crack down on crime. Yeah, that's what we got to do. As, of course, the people that have been born into nothing, that have nothing, and have lost those entrepreneurial opportunities that used to exist in the United States at one time, no longer exists, resort to what they can only do best. Crime pays. And I'm not saying that as a nasty, throwaway line. Crime pays. If you're one of the top bankers in the country, crime pays. If you're John Corzine of MF Global, who robs segregated accounts, including mine, crime pays. If you're the head of Countrywide Mutual that had all those fraudulent mortgages, crime pays. So the people see that crime pays, so they're going to get into a paying job.
I appreciate you coming on and sharing your points of view, Gerald. My guest, Gerald Celente, Celente. The website is TrendsResearch.com. His publication, the TrendsJournal. He's very impassioned, but he has been right on hundreds of issues, so it's worth paying attention. Gerald, all the best to you.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for having me, Gary.